Hello, and welcome to the Practical Creative Podcast, where I talk to people who are out there actively making and doing creative work. I want to know more about their materials, their processes, what it is that motivates or inspires them to keep creating. And along the way, I'm also learning more about the nature of creativity itself. I'm Jeremiah Craigie, and in this episode, I'll be talking with contemporary bookbinder Kate Holland. Kate is an award-winning artist who designs and hand-builds exquisite book bindings that act as a canvas where she can express her own interpretation of the contents. And we cover a lot in this episode, including the scope for commentary and self-expression in bookbinding, eclectic sources of imagery and inspiration, her research process into images and materials, her thoughts on creativity, and loads more. I learned so much in this episode, and I'm sure that when you're finished, you will never look at a book or its cover the same again.
Okay. There's someone sneaking around in the background there, trying to get dressed.
I hope he is. Are you dressed? I hope he is.
He's getting there. Great. Some of these questions I might have asked you already in the beginning of the last time we spoke, but it'd just be great to get them afresh, just to get a clean audio. The first one is to ask you to just tell us who you are and what you do.
Mm-hmm. So I am Kate Holland, and I'm a bookbinder, and I specialise in contemporary fine binding. So that means I still use the same traditional techniques and materials that people have been using for centuries, but the look and the feel of the books is very much contemporary and modern, and it responds to the text and the illustrations and the period in which a book's written, so it's very much my interpretation of a text on the cover and within the edges and the doublures and the end papers. I work mainly on commission, or I suppose about half and half commission and half speculative. And so I'll exhibit and hope to sell everything after an exhibition. It's nice having a commission, but because you know you're going to get paid at the end of it, but it's also can be a little bit constrictive. But whereas if you're doing stuff speculatively, it's very much your choice of text and what you want to put on the cover. I like a bit of both.
I've got two questions and they'll follow on from that. One is, how much scope do you have to design the cover?
Pretty much clean sheet. Some clients will want a bit of input, but generally, if it's a design binding, I'm pretty much left to my own devices. I'll normally put forward a drawing or a maquette or some leather choices or just my ideas and just give people a feel for it when I put in a budget at the same time. But generally, I'm left to my own devices, which is great.
And what is it that guides your design process in coming up with a design to go onto the cover?
Well, you've got to read the book first, very much, and then I will usually research around it as well. So, for instance, the modest proposal is about 18th century Ireland, impoverished people, and about rich men and rich ladies, and it's about, without going into the details, it's about eating babies, basically. And it's using their skins for the boots of gentlemen and babies on silver platters in fine dining rooms. And so I then go and look at early 18th century Irish silverware, for instance, or I'll go and look at furniture, or the cutlery that they would have used in those days. Or so you just research all around the subject. In fact, I didn't use any of those images in the end, but it's all just useful input. I ended up using very contemporary images which reflect all the themes throughout the book, so things like immigration and housing issues and abortion and child poverty, but contemporary images from modern day Ireland. That's what eventually went on the cover.
Oh, that's fantastic. So you can marry quite a historical text and almost recontextualize it with what you put on the cover.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like to bring in a contemporary comment, modern day comment or reflection on what's going on in today's society, because you can pretty much always find some kind of what's the word?
Parallel.
Thank you. Yes. Parallel between yes, any text from any period, and today.
Is that something that historically bookbinders have done?
No, very much not. Historically, you would go to the booksellers and you would buy your book in sheets, printed sheets, and then you would then take it to your bookbinder, and you would, if you're a large house, you'd have your armorial stamp on it, and so it's very much about ownership, and obviously the richer and wealthier are, the more gold you have on it, and it's a status symbol, and it's very much a traditional way of doing it, and various messages can be read within bindings, but it's pretty formulaic up until about the 1920s, I'd say, 10s and 20s, when the arts and crafts movement and then Art Deco and Art Nouveau came in. Up to that point, it was pretty much the same. It hadn't really changed that much in terms of decoration.
That's quite interesting, because I wouldn't have thought of bookbinding as being a canvas for self-expression.
No.
But it sounds like you have a lot of latitude to explore both a range of styles, but also comment on the content of the book.
Yeah, and I'm increasingly finding that is where I want to lead my bindings. And I'm currently doing the binding of the picture of Dorian Gray. And so I've got imagery of someone who's addicted to plastic surgery, so it's extreme plastic surgery imagery that I'm using. So obviously the vanity or the lack of self-esteem or whatever's coming out, the parallels are the same between Dorian Gray and people who, yes, want to cut themselves up for the sake of beauty.
Fascinating. So that leads me to the other question, which is, how do you choose, if it's not a commission, if you haven't been given a book to design, how do you choose the books that you do on spec?
Really randomly, and that's not really very helpful. But I'll either have an idea for a cover, or I'll have a text that I want to do. And they don't necessarily marry together. I'll go around collecting ideas, or I'll see something in a magazine, or in the landscape, or in a I don't know where who knows where inspiration comes from, and I'll think, okay, I want to use that on a book. For instance, I saw in National Geographic 2 images of a sunset over a salt lake, and they're really, really beautiful, very, very vivid. One was very the sort of pale yellow and pale blue and orange, and just this single line of the horizon, and then the other one was very dark, very midnight blue. Trying to remember the name. I think it's Murray Fredericks, I think was the name of the photographer. They're really, really beautiful. And I thought, that's perfect. It's a perfect pair of books, but it's the opposite, a pair of opposites. And so I was thinking, what on earth can I think of that's been written that fits that bill? So I eventually plumped on Milton's Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. So it's they're the opposites, heaven and hell, and used that imagery, used William Blake's illustrations inside, reflect that in the golden sun rays that were on the inside of the doubleurs, but otherwise it was hand-dyed calf skin with a single terracotta goat skin horizontal line across the boards, but different colorations. But so it was that was how I reached that particular binding. Another time I had to bind Elizabeth David, A Book of Mediterranean Food. This is for a competition, so I'd been given this, and I was like, what am I going to do? I was lying on the floor in an exercise class, staring at the ceiling, as you do, or I do, and there was a speaker on the ceiling of concentric circles of varying sized dots, and I thought, I like that pattern, I want to use that pattern somehow. So I then translated that into the sun, basically. So it's a turquoise goat skin that I dyed. It's a alum tawed goat skin, which is white, which I hand dyed, and then used those dots. They were inlaid dots of varying oranges through yellows and then golds radiating out, and that's where that inspiration came from. So it is, as I say, it's random. I couldn't give you a straight answer to that question.
How do you marry the responsibility to the author versus your own desire for expression and to follow an idea of your own?
Well, it's very much my artistic response to that text. So I would obviously try and reflect the period and the feel of the book and what the author's the message the author is trying to give. So obviously, if it's a lovely, happy, shiny book, I'll reflect that in the binding, or alternatively, I might tend to go towards the darker side of things. That just seems to be my nature, or where I seem to end up. But I'm also increasingly thinking that, because putting a binding on someone else's book, whether if it's a book that's been obviously written by an author, then it's been printed by a printer, maybe illustrated by an illustrator, coming along as the binder, you're very much coming along at the end of that process, and you're not necessarily being consulted along the way. You've been given the finished product, and so I'm increasingly been questioning the validity of my coming along and putting essentially decorative binding onto someone else's work, and I'm thinking that maybe actually I need to be doing the whole book, so I need complete control over the text, the illustrations, the way it's been printed, laid out, and then the binding, and then that becomes more of a whole as opposed to just a binding on the outside of somebody else's book.
So when you say responsibility for the text, is that actually creating text? You're writing your own book, or is it selecting text or selecting even fonts and how it's printed?
Yeah, no, I haven't got the confidence to write my own. I certainly wouldn't. But I have, and I've done a book recently with an artist and a poet, and so we all got together and collaborated on the whole thing. And I'm just about to start work with a printmaker and using Coleridge's poems. And then we've got someone else to write the introduction, but I will be responsible for the printing and the layout and the paper choice and the binding, that side of things.
So you're collaborating on the curation of a book. That's a question that I'm asking a lot of people who work creatively, is about the collaborative process. I'm curious to know how different people approach that and what they get from the process of collaboration. Because it is always a balancing act between different viewpoints and different aesthetics and different priorities depending on who you're working with. So I'm curious to know what your experience of collaboration has been.
Well, I've been lucky so far in that I've chosen my collaborators rather than them choosing me, so that's good. Generally, I enjoy collaborating because it's a very solitary process, bookbinding, so it's nice to have some interaction with another creative mind, and they may, introduce something that you hadn't thought about, or lead you down a different path, or so it's interesting to see where you end up as well, the journey as well as the finished product. I don't really like being told what to do. I quite like not getting my own way, but I'm fairly, once I've made a decision about what's going to happen, I can find it marginally frustrating if someone says, I don't want that, I want it like this. That would disappoint me because that's a slight arrogance on my behalf. But no, generally, I enjoy the collaborative process, and so far so good. It's all been good.
I think also the question of collaboration is interesting from the point of view that you are always collaborating with the author of the book, particularly when I know you've done a lot of designs for the Booker Prize, and you're given a book that you haven't chosen. I know you can bid to a degree on books that you're interested in, but you still have to collaborate with the author in terms of what their content is, which goes back to my earlier question about how do you manage that tension between what they're writing, what their vision is, what their potential comment even on society is, and then what you're choosing to express on the cover.
Yeah, it's a very subjective thing. It's always very nerve-wracking handing over a finished prize to a living author. It's helpful if they're not around to comment. I've only ever had positive reactions, whether they're just being polite, I don't know, but they all seem thrilled and touched and really quite emotional. People become when you hand them back their book and they see what you have created with their book, because normally they were obviously, I think if you're an author, you get your first print run and you get your first book comes from the publishers, and that's obviously a really, really exciting moment. But to then, you've probably had some collaboration on the cover design and what the end papers are going to look like, but to have it completely out of the blue from someone and taken to a much higher craft level, people really, really, they love it. They're really, really, overcome. I'm just thinking, going back to the collaboration thing, I was just thinking, well, I'm normally brought in for my expertise in bookbinding. I was just thinking, if you're two artists collaborating, then the tension is potentially greater. Whereas if I'm collaborating with an author and an illustrator, and me, I'm then just the book person. All our skills they're intertwined, but they're different. And so I wouldn't tell the author how to write his book, and hopefully they wouldn't tell me what paper to choose. They do sometimes, but generally I'm left to my own devices on that front. So even though I'm collaborating, I'm kind of still in charge of my bit of the process.
No, that makes sense, because I guess that's the other thing, is there are different kinds of collaboration. It's there are many levels of collaboration and different ways of doing that. But I think I can see how collaborating in a process where you can maintain some control or ownership over your specific skills, and that they're then complementing someone else's skill set, then that allows a little more independence and freedom, as opposed to having to marry two very different processes together and make them work practically. It's just that little bit of separation can make things easier.
Collaborating with another bookbinder would be tricky, because obviously there's only one plane to work on, and if I can only think of one example of two bookbinders that collaborated on one book.
And how did that?
Very successfully.
Oh.
It looked great. There was a wooden board at the front and a leather one, a vellum one at the back. It looked great, but I don't think I would do it myself. I don't think.
Okay, so that's quite interesting, because I've realized I often say, "Oh, that's quite interesting," and then move on to another question. That's my only transition I have. I'm showing you the behind the scenes of a podcast. So when you're not collaborating, obviously you're working on your own. Can you describe what your normal working day looks like?
Mm-hmm. School run. That's the first thing to do, is get the kids to school, fed, out the door, teeth brushed. And I get back, and I probably do quite a lot of fiddling about, staring at emails and trying not to get distracted by the internet. And then I'll finally not pluck up the courage, but some days I'll run straight to the workshop and I need to get stuck straight in and excited, and other days it's slightly, I can drag my heels a bit because it's cold and damp and it's me and the radio and that's it, and so it can take a bit of gumption to kick on. I think I was always told you've got to get out there, do your thing, earn the money, and I'll get out there. I'll try and warm it up, turn on the fire, turn on the the stove, and normally I'll put a book to bed the night before, and so getting that out is always can be a nerve-wracking moment, because you want to see what it looks like. Was it as good as you remember or as bad as you remember? So it's always good to see that it's not as bad as you remember, usually, the following morning. I think when you're lying awake in bed worrying about stuff in the middle of the night and everything just gets exacerbated, and any minor problems that you can think of just seem much, much bigger in your head in the dark. And so when you get to see the book itself, it's always a relief to actually think that to realise that you were worrying about it too much. And then I'll work, and if it's all going well, I'll keep going, work through lunch. If it's not going well, I'll go walk the dog, because that is definitely the best way to clear the head and just to think things through. You can get very wound up in going down one path and it not working, and you don't quite know why, and it's frustrating, and you're just trying other stuff and it's still not working. So walking the dog, getting out, fresh air, getting the blood to the brain, that is very important. I should discipline myself to do it first thing, and then in theory everything will go well from there. But so I'll work through till about 4:30, pick up a child, bring it back, give it a sandwich, probably then go back for another hour or so until it needs to come back and stop. And quite often I'll put the child to bed and then go back again, and I can work from sort of 9 till 12 again, which I actually quite like that time because it's quiet. There's no distractions. The phone's not ringing. There's not someone knocking on the door. I like working at that time. It does take me a bit of time to rev up, but once I'm going, it's frustrating to have to then stop. But yeah, the child has to come home from school.
Yeah. And you said some mornings you have to rev yourself up. Are there any things that you do to help prepare yourself before you go in? Any, for example, I was speaking to a ceramicist, and the first thing is make a cup of coffee, and and it's make a cup of coffee and put on his work clothes, because then he knows he's ready. That's the ritual of getting ready to work, and it helps prepare himself for the day ahead. Is there anything that you do that helps prepare you for going into the studio and being focused and productive?
Caffeine helps definitely, and I have a very well-worn apron that is when I put that on, it I mean business. And putting in my contact lenses, I can wander around for quite a long time without my contact lenses in, and then I'm wondering why nothing's really happening. And then if I put in my contact lenses, I put on my apron, make a cup of tea or a strong cup of coffee, and then I'm ready to go. It is true. I haven't really thought about it. I'm ready when the apron's on.
So it sounds like the contact lenses are literally giving you focus.
Yes.
That's a terrible pun. I apologize. So, in the studio, what kinds of tools are you using? Or do you have a favorite tool?
Tool I probably use the most is a bone folder, which is a flat piece of bone that I have several different shapes and sizes that I sand. You soak them in olive oil when you get them back, and so that they're less brittle, and then sand them to different shapes according to what you need to use them for, whether it's making head caps or covering with leather or. So and I love the fact that someone said, "Oh, this is man's oldest tool. This is they've been using bits of bone and fragments of bone. That's the sort of first thing man would have picked up. Well, maybe that and a rock, but I like that continuity, that I'm still connected with people doing things with their hands. So I'll use that. I'll use I have a very lovely what's called a paring knife, which I made from a high-speed hacksaw blade. You get a nice big steel blade, and you grind off all the teeth of the hacksaw off it, and then put a bevel on it. And then that needs sharpening on the diamond stone every morning, because that's your tools. The sharpness of your tools is really important. How they fit in your hand. My paring knife, if I lend it to anyone, I know now not to lend it to anyone, because the minute you lend it to someone, the bevel changes somehow, and when you get it back, it's just not sharp. It's like using a fountain pen, that you've had worn to your writing style, and the minute you use someone else's, it just doesn't work as well, does it? It's just how your hand works. So that is very useful. And then I just have a whole array of bits and bobs that I've picked up over the years, over charity shops, and I picked up a little kit of dentist tools, which are very, very handy. All my equipment is all hand equipment, so I don't have any kind of mechanization. The presses that I use are all cast iron, probably Victorian-ish or turn of the century. The tools that I use for lettering, they're all different fonts, and each individual letter is a single tool that needs to be placed. And there's a lot of great kit. People come in and they're like, "Wow, tools!" People get off on tools.
Are there any others that you have either made or adapted?
So I've made quite a lot of hand tools. So if you want to tool a design onto a book, you can buy, ready-made squares, rectangles, circles. But I tend to get old tools and then file them into different shapes. So I did a binding of 2001 Space Odyssey, and I wanted like an asteroid field. So I had got about 3 or 4 different tools and filed them into asteroid shapes, funnily enough, which is not something you can buy off the shelf, and tooled those in holographic foil all over the book, that was quite fun. So, but yeah, I do increasingly. I don't want those set shapes. I want my shapes, and I want them slightly circles, not to be circular. I want them slightly off, or I want them. I'm looking for individuality rather than perfection. Still perfection, but with my take on it.
And a question that I probably should have asked at the very beginning is, why books? Because it sounds like a very limited canvas. You mentioned that it's only one plane to work on, so everything has to be, as I understand it, you could probably prove me wrong in 10 different ways, but everything is two-dimensional, and you only have the front and back of the book, and maybe a little bit of are they called end papers? The bit that's just inside the cover. So what's the appeal?
The reason I started bookbinding in the first place was I was an antiquarian bookseller. Worked in an antiquarian bookshop, and I wanted to get out. I think I just wanted to have a morning off, and I enjoyed the refurbishment of antique bindings, and I went and did a morning's workshop a week at City Lit, and I fell into bookselling because I actually studied Chinese at university, and I was working and I wanted to be a contemporary Chinese art dealer at a very precocious young age, but then I was working at the British Museum in the Oriental department there, and then couldn't find a job in any of the Oriental galleries. It was a very new thing. Contemporary Chinese art just didn't really exist in London at that point. I should have gone to New York or Hong Kong at that point, but I didn't. I just needed a job, and I needed to pay the rent, and so I found this bookshop with the sign in the window, and that was the beginning of a love affair with books. And I suppose as a child, I lived near Hay-on-Wye, which is the book town. My father would take me all the time, and we'd go and just wandering up and down the aisles of books. I loved books. I wasn't particularly a bookish child, but I did enjoy the feel and the look and the illustrations, and so I can trace it back to that. But in terms of your question of the 2D-ness of it, I think actually there's not just one plane. I think I was worked out there's about 10 planes, in that you have the cover, you have a front cover, a spine, and a back cover. So that's 3 planes, but in one. So they all have to work individually, but together as well as a single unit, but stand on their own as well. You then, on a fine binding, you'll have what are called doubleurs, which is the paste out. So the inside of the cover is what's called a doubleur. The end paper is then the free sheet of paper, first free sheet of paper that you come to in the book. You then have 3 edges, so top foredge, head, foredge, and tail, and you have headbands. So the sewn. The sewing that you get at the top and the bottom of a book. Normally you'll have seen on a book, you'll have, I don't know how to explain it more than it's a sewn headband, which is not very helpful. So that's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 areas where you can show your creativity and your interpretation of the text, and they should all work together and individually as well. So it's not just one, and it is a 3D thing. It's got to work as a book as well. I'm currently working on a book which is it's a miniature, and it's called a beetle assembly, and my plan in my head, I haven't quite worked out if it's going to work, is to take the wings, is so that when the book opens, is so that the shell parts and the wings unfold, and so it's going to be a fully sculptural moving object, so that so it looks like a beetle in flight when it's open, but when it's closed, it's a beetle, with its wings and shell carapace. I think that's the right word. Closed, ensconced.
That sounds extraordinary.
But this is in my head at the moment. I shouldn't say it to you out loud, otherwise I'll have to do it and make it work.
That leads me to another question, which is what happens when you do get stuck? You have an idea in your head, but when it comes to execution, you don't know how to move forward. How do you deal with that?
Experimenting. Quite a lot of just trying stuff out, and you have it in your head, and putting it down on paper, drawing it first, seeing if it, and having elements that you then maybe print out off the print. I use Photoshop quite a lot to adapt stuff, and then I can cut it out and move it around on a life-size frame of the book, just to work out where things will be positioned, because it might work in my head, but then when you actually put it down on paper, it doesn't. The color combinations and quite a lot of YouTubing. If I want to know, like at the moment, I want to do another Chinese book, but I want to have it red lacquer covers, and I'm like, I don't know how to do red lacquer, but I'm damn well going to work out how to make a pretty good stab at something similar, so that I will. I've learned an awful lot off YouTube in terms of how to demonstrate, videos, and I did a cover which I wanted it to look like rust. So I was like, okay, I want, and I found a special paint that you can paint on, which is an iron filings paint, and then it has an activator, and it's basically you're painting on rust, and it was great. I loved it. But yeah. It's experimentation. It's the joy of the internet. It's the library as well. You get the libraries. I love libraries. My local library. Just go down and look at books and look at pictures and what other people have done around throughout time and throughout the world, and just soak it up, and then go on a dog walk and spit it out afterwards.
It sounds like you are constantly learning and applying new techniques, but that they're often, this is an assumption on my part, that, for example, with the rust, you can use it on one book, but chances are it's unlikely that you'll be able to use it again on another book, at least not for quite some time. How does that feel to have to constantly learn new techniques and not reinvent the wheel, but kind of go back to zero knowledge and try to upskill, knowing that you may only be able to use that once?
I'm very happy doing that. I really like. I think my boredom threshold is quite low, so if I was just churning out the same thing over and over again, I would soon tire of it. So I was known for doing dots on books, and I was like, when someone asked me for a binding with dots on, do your dots, Kate? I was like, no, I'm not going to do dots. I'm going to do something completely different. So, yes, I don't know whether it's me just being contrary or, I like discovering new stuff and learning stuff, and you have it then in your arsenal of tools that you can call up on, and there's different combinations and maybe different things that you've done or slight adaptations or, It makes things a bit slower if you've got to go and learn it all and experiment and practice, and you also record all your experiments. That's the most important thing. Is you do an experiment, you then finally get to where you want it to be, but you then the week later think, okay, I want to do that now. And you haven't written down the exact formula of how you achieved it. Then you've got to start all over again. So it's that's an important part of it is the recording of the experiments and filing, and then you can look back through them all and say, how did I do that? How did I do that? And it's much quicker and easier to replicate later on. Do
you have a system for doing that? Because I admit I am terrible at that. So how do you organize it?
I'll do something, if it's a piece of leather or a piece of board or paper or whatever it is, I'll just write on the back what I've done and then put it in a big box. That's as bad as organised as it gets. But yeah, I organised chaos. I know her.
Okay, so you had me convinced there that you had a fantastic filing cabinet. Yeah.
No, sorry. One day.
Okay. So you mentioned that you're constantly learning new techniques, but it takes time to do that. It takes time to read the book. It takes time to come up with a design that's appropriate for the book. And time is costly. How do you balance the financial aspects of being remunerated for your time when it is so time intensive? And I imagine it sounds like some of the materials are costly as well.
That is a constant discussion that I have with myself. Is if I work out my hourly rate at the end of a book, it's not great. Even though it looks like I'm selling a really, really expensive book, you try not to think about the hourly rate. And it's a bit feast and famine as well. You either suddenly got lots of money, or you're building up to something, or you're creating something speculatively, and you may or may not sell, and that's quite an investment in terms of time and materials. So yes, in answer to your question, I think I worked out it's about 150 hours in a proper fine binding, and that's not including the thinking and the experimenting. That's just bench time. So it is considerable, and I run several projects at a time, so I'll be working on probably 2 books physically, and probably in my head I'll probably be researching 2 others and getting together materials, and then in my head I'll be thinking the next project. So I'm probably running about 5 or 6 projects at any one point, just that you've got a flow of finished things going out the door and a mixture of speculative and commissions. So you've always got some money coming in. Just to keep the wolf on the door. I do quite a lot of teaching as well, increasingly, or just going to, which I like. It gets me out, and I like spreading the word. So, and that's just sort of easy money, if that's the right word to use. But you do a day, you get paid, job done. That's much simpler.
Are there any aspects of being a self-employed craftsperson from a business point of view, be it marketing or self-promotion or teaching, as you say? Are there any aspects of it beyond the actual work of designing and making that you enjoy?
I like the planning and the build-up and, getting to the finished product. The marketing and the self-promotion bit, I struggle with, and I need to improve that one. So you've got a great product, but how you then sell it for what it should be worth, I need to, work on that one. But, I'm doing pretty well. I haven't got anything to show, in terms of, I've got no unsold bindings. Everything's been sold, and someone said, if they've all been sold, then you must be too cheap. Put your prices up.
Yeah, that you ratchet the price until you start having some stock that doesn't sell, and that means you've, to some degree, have found your level for the market. But it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because you also want to make sure the sale goes through. You don't want to price yourself out of the market and then have too much debt or too much dead stock. And particularly when each piece is bespoke or completely unique.
Yeah, no, it's not like you're doing a run of 50, so they all sell for exact same price. Each one is, each one is, as you say, individual, and it's different every time. It's not a great business model. It's more like you work something out and then just repeat it. It's just got to start all over again every time.
Well, I think that's the reason I'm particularly interested in speaking to people about the business element, because it's tricky to find a solution to it, because so much of this work is time intensive and labor intensive, but the market is small of people who actually appreciate the time and effort and the craftsmanship that goes into these things. So how does one find a way to make a viable living from, a viable income. And a lot of it tends to, as I understand it, is people falling back on the fact that actually they enjoy what they do, so that offsets to a degree, and they're often able to make enough to get by. And there are only a few people who have managed to crack I don't want to say that's a code, but have found a way of turning it into something bigger. And usually when they do, there's a sacrifice in terms of how much time they're actually left in the studio hands-on with the materials, versus then having to spend more time on publicity, promotion, distribution, and because when things scale, they get more complicated. So I keep asking the question, hoping someone's got a brilliant answer to that question. But it's also great to hear that other people are still working on, still struggling. Yes, yeah.
I'm actually in the process of expanding my workshop now. I mean, I've got the concrete lorry was in yesterday, filling up the garage floor. So that I can bring in a bit of mechanization. I can bring in an electric guillotine. I can bring in, at the moment I am hand cutting every book edge with a plough. So that's very, very slowly slicing across the book edge. Gives you an absolutely perfect one, but it takes time, and time is money. And so by bringing in a bit of mechanization, and also my plan is to bring in an apprentice stroke assistant, and then do a slightly more affordable range. So it's like the haute couture versus the fusion line of a designer. So you'll have so they can be producing still beautifully crafted leather-bound books, but they're not the top notch. They're not, and they can also be producing. So we can have a bit of bread and butter going on in the background all the time, and I can be watching over it and ensuring quality control. But I can still, it frees me up then to do my thing and promote it, and that's my plan. Well, I'll let you know in a year's time if it's worked.
Well, that sounds great, and you're training someone else in those skills.
Yes, because there is not a standalone bookbinding course left in the UK. You cannot I did an HND. A higher national diploma. It was what was the London College of Printing, but is now London College of Communication. You cannot go and learn. Where I went through every structure, from absolute start to finish, and came away being able to do full leather bindings with gold tooling and make boxes and do design bindings, but as well as more basic cloth case-bound books. There are two places where Shepherd's Bookbinders, they are trying to bring back the City and Guilds bookbinding courses, so they're in the process of getting there. And there's also the Queen's Bindery apprenticeship schemes. The bindery at Windsor Castle take on 2 apprentices a year who will then get fully trained up. But that's only 2 people a year, which is a great pity because, as I keep saying, I'm one of the younger bookbinders, and I'm not that young anymore, sadly. And there's an awful lot of enthusiasm for the craft from students that I'm teaching, but I think they're put off by the amount of time it takes to learn. There's an awful lot of skills that need to be learnt. Also, equipment is not cheap. And you need space. It's not just folding a bit of paper. There's an awful lot of other stuff you need in order to be able to, make a fine binding.
So, looking back on it, is there anything that you know now that you wish you had known earlier?
I suspect if I'd stayed as a contemporary Chinese art dealer and gone to Hong Kong or New York, I might have a bit more money in my bank account now. But I wouldn't have satisfaction making things with my hands. I do love that. I struggle sometimes with the solitariness of it. So maybe I would work in an environment where there are other people. But it works well working at home with kids and dogs and all the paraphernalia that come with family life.
What are some things that you do that aren't productive in a creative sense, that you do to help sort of recharge your batteries or get some space or to clear your mind?
Walking and swimming. Those are the two, and cooking, I suppose, is the other thing I love.
Oh.
Very keen on the cooking, but increasingly I find during the week, it's just chucking whatever you can find in the fridge on the table, and everyone better be grateful for it. But come the weekend, there's a bit more time to plan and think about it and shop and look through recipe books, and I really enjoy that if you have enough leisure time to do it slowly, not just because people need feeding.
So I'm going to shift gears a little bit to some other questions that are a bit more about creativity in a broader sense. The first one is just, are there any creative people that particularly inspire you?
I was thinking about this, and I think musicians. I love music. I'm a great listener of music and soaker-upper of new music. I think Nick Cave, particularly, I would quote as being a bit of a fan of his. Prince, I can dance around my workshop to quite a lot. David Bowie and Prince going in one year was a big blow for me. That was a sad year. But then some new music. My kids are all into grime, and I actually really love it. A bit too old to admit it, but it has an energy and a voice, and it's a generation saying stuff about what's going on and how unfairly they're treated, and I think it's stuff. Other people, artists. Again, coming back to my Chinese degree, I did my thesis was in contemporary. It was actually in traditional Chinese landscape painting. And the Taoist religion and the combination thereof. So I do find myself coming back to Chinese art a lot, and I'm now working on another piece which involves a famous landscape painting. And before I did the Nine Dragons, which was also based on a traditional Chinese scroll of dragons. So I'm also very keen on the communist art. Sorry, goodbye, Fred. Chinese communist art. Socialist realism. I have a lot of, I used to collect the posters. I've got giant Maoist posters of workers instructing me to keep going, do it for the motherland, which I love their shining faces. I try not to think about the other aspects of the Maoist regime, but also just turning up in a gallery and totally randomly and walking into a random room and not particularly going to an exhibition because that is the must-see exhibition. I would probably generally go do the opposite and go to the room that no one wants to go to. And realising that classics are classics for a reason because they're really, really good. I think we sort of look down at constables and stubs, and because we're thinking that they're traditional and it's got to be modern and it's got to be angry and it's got to be and you're just going to look at the brushwork up close of a constable and it's just or a turner, it's just phenomenal. So again, random magpie attitude to everything, but
Are there any skills that you feel that are really critical or really help to support creativity?
I think having an open mind and just being a sponge and just not channeling yourself down one path and just whether it's classical music versus grime versus medieval paintings versus abstract art, or just read everything and look at everything and open your eyes and just look. I think that's the best thing that you can do. And listen and read. It's all relevant.
It's a difficult question, but how would you define creativity?
Well, problem solving, I think, more than anything, is how you get from one place to another and not innovation for innovation's sake, but if you're trying to respond to something, but it's your personal subjective response. So you've got to also put in your characteristics, but yet also pay homage to who you're responding, what text you're responding to. So yes, original thought, but I don't think there is such a thing as original thought. It is a magpie thing, isn't it? And it all goes through the sausage machine and it comes out the other end as something that is uniquely yours. And yeah, creativity is a sausage machine. There you are.
That's perfect. I like that. So another question that I'm asking people is, if I were to give you someone who said that they aren't creative, is there anything that you could do or ask of them that might help them change their perception? Actually, let me backtrack. Do you think anyone can be creative? Do you think everyone is creative?
Well, I always say I was not allowed to do art O-level because I couldn't draw, I couldn't paint, I was just put down as a non-artist. But we had to do an art subject at my school, so I ended up doing needlework, which I didn't really feel was my métier, but that's what I was told I had to do, and I suppose it has come in handy now in that it, I do sewing, and it's quite a precise craft, so that's useful, but I'm not naturally a precise person, so I have to be quite disciplined about that aspect. But in terms of encouraging someone else's creativity, so that's what I say, is that when people say, oh, go and sketch, go and draw, I was like, I've never done that. I can do it if I have to, because I have to get ideas out of my head and onto a paper to show to someone else, because they obviously can't see what's going on in my head. So from that point of view, I have to be able to translate my thoughts into physical beings. But I think just looking and the joy of the phone camera, if you go out there and you see, there was a lime acid green catkin that was, and the backdrop was a really, really dark grey sky, and I just took a photograph of it. I just thought, that colour combination is awesome. I'm going to use that. So I then took a picture, brought it home, put it in my computer, and then about a year or two later, I finally used it on a book, a little miniature book about mistletoe. So it was just that acid green on the dark grey. I also find that I'm quite affected by seasonality, about the seasons around me. I find that a book that I'm binding, I tend to do quite dark grey and black books during winter, and quite a lot of terracottas and yellows and greens in the autumn, and it's weird, and I don't do it on purpose. It just happens to be like that. And I think being out in the landscape, and I'm very, very lucky where I live. It's a rural setting, and it's beautiful countryside, and it's very inspirational, but I'm also inspired by urban landscapes as well, and industrial landscapes, and graffiti, and factories, and architecture, and pavements, and pollution, and as much as leaf buds and baby lambs.
Brilliant. So, is there a challenge that you'd want to set out for listeners?
Okay, but this follows on from what I was just saying, is going out and looking at colour combinations, and so I happen to be the Ladies' Loos in Hampstead Heath, happen to have a really amazing terracotta tiles, and then there's a sort of a lemon yellow wall, and then there's some sort of turquoisey tiles on the wall, and just that, where those three meet, it was just a gorgeous combination of colours. So you take a picture on your phone, whether it's the acid green catkin against the dark grey sky, or whether it's leaf mulch under your feet, or whether it's, you can, wherever you are, whether you're in an urban or graffiti, or wherever you are, there's inspiration out there, and interesting colour combinations. So looking at colour around you, and how artists have used colour in paintings, go right in close and look where the yellow meets the vermilion meets the azure. And then what I encourage my kids to do is you get just a cheap set of acrylics or something, or any kind of paint, but acrylics are the easiest and cheapest. And just in the beginner set, the red, yellow, blue, black, white, and try to recreate that colour combination that you've seen in paint by colour mixing. So if you've got that, you've got to get that exact acid green and that exact grey from your three primary colours in your black and your white. So that is my challenge, is go out and look at colour and recreate it by mixing colours. Paint.
That is fantastic. That's very exciting. Okay. That's you've thrown down the gauntlet. That's great for me personally, because I have traditionally been rather scared of working with color, just not feeling confident working with color. And I think anything that forces me to engage with it is good for me personally. So I'm going to definitely have to take that on and have a go at that.
Satisfying when you hit the right color, that extra dot of black kicks it into touch. It's fun. It's good.
Yeah, brilliant. So I've got just one last question for you, which is, what do you think the future of books is?
Well, I'm hoping it's a rosy one. I'm hoping it's. There was obviously the emergence of the e-book, and everyone, tore their clothing and rent their tore out their hair. But the sale of e-books is now down, and the sale of physical books is up. It's higher than it ever has been. I think in the UK especially, people like buying the physical book. And so my hope as a creator of essentially what is the top of the range in terms of book production, I'm hoping that the book as art object will come out. I'm not worried about the future of the book, because as ebooks proliferate or screens proliferate, I'm afraid it comes down to the people who've got the money will then want the ultimate art object, to own that ultimate art object. It becomes a sort of, what's the word? It's not deified, that's the wrong word, but revered it's separate from the masses, which screens and ebooks is masses, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, it's just in terms of numbers. And the book as art object, at the moment I'm working on a book display cabinet with a cabinet maker friend of mine, and this is so that you can then look at the book in the round. So normally you'll look at books and they'll be on a shelf and all you see is the spine, or it will be in a box and all you'll see is the spine of the box. This is going to be so you can display one book in an environment that is, it's protected, it's UV glass, and it's, dehumidifiers and all and so it's but you have it open so you can view it in the round 360 degrees. So when I make my book, it's not just the front cover that I want people to see. I want people to see all the way around. So the inside, the doubleurs, the edges, the end papers, the top, the headband. This is what I'm working on at the moment. So it's bringing the book off the shelf and out into the open, and having it like a painting or a sculpture. It's not just to be squirreled away.
Well, Kate, this has been fantastic. It's been really, really fascinating. Where can people find you online?
My website is katehollandbooks.co.uk, and I have Twitter and Instagram, which I feed the social media monster very rare sometimes from time to time, and they're both at Kate Holland Book.
Thank you again for the time. Okay, Kate. All right then. Have a good afternoon.
Hey there. Thanks for taking the time to listen to this episode of The Practical Creative. If you'd like to learn more about Kate and her work, you can visit the Practical Creative website at thepracticalcreative.life, where you'll find images of her work and links to other material. And if you'd like to have a go at Kate's Creative Challenge, you can find a written version on the Creative Challenge page. just head on over to the website and check it out. And if you've enjoyed this episode of the Practical Creative Podcast, it would be great if you would subscribe to the show, leave a review, or follow me on Instagram @PracticalCreative. Also, just really quickly, if you're interested in ceramics or makers with an uncompromising approach to their work, then check out my Q&A with Gareth Mason. Gareth is a ceramicist working with a highly distinctive and powerful visual language that challenges the limits of both the clay and the audience in equal measure. You can find it over on the Practical Creative website.